Well, I've missed everybody. I hope you have your best outfits on because today is going to be quite the party. We're going to be talking about quantum decoherence, dimensionality reduction, the tantric Sri Yantra, and EEG fractal dimensional analysis. Overview of the topics that we'll cover, how you can link pretty much everything to quantum decoherence, how our brains may carry a secret link to bridging cosmic consciousness and human consciousness, the sacred geometry of Sri Yantra and its meaning and its applications to us, intelligent, efficient packaging of data from higher dimensional spaces to lower dimensional spaces throughout the cosmos, and how we can go about unraveling and unpackaging it all with some examples. Correlations between the cosmos, shapes, the human mind, and mental regulation. And a new word I learned, scientism, and how it's an oppressive system of our consciousness. Spicy. It all begins with decoherence. To recap, quantum decoherence, what is it? Stemming from the topic of quantum mechanics, which is basically the understanding the physics behind really tiny systems. And it's oppositional to coherence. Coherence is a state of superposition where infinite possibilities exist simultaneously. Decoherence is the decay of that coherence, where one possibility from the infinite begins to solidify. It takes place when there's any interaction involved, whether it be environmental or anything observing that state. The form of something from infinite fields becomes now limited and keeps reducing possibilities into finally solidifying any particular reality and creating a final form for it. So let's take a look at the fun ways that this shows up everywhere, starting with the human mind. So let's take a quick step back. If you've been watching previous lectures, you know that my stance is everything that exists in the cosmos pulls from the universal field of consciousness, UFC. I also refer to it as Brahman, and that human beings are really just these containers of consciousness. Like imagine like a field, it's vibrating, right? And bloop, bloop, like things become, it's an emergent property of these vibrations, right? So, with that being said, I called everything. If I'm pulling from a field of consciousness, then you could kind of deduce that I'm saying everything is to a degree conscious, which kind of falls in line with the philosophy of panpsychism. But it's because I've sort of dropped the ego and I've begun to not look at things from the human perspective when I think about consciousness, in terms of how I define things. And we'll have a full circle moment at the end of the talk about consciousness and how we potentially discriminate with what's conscious and what's not. So if decoherence begins the moment the cosmos comes into creation from its inception and is constantly taking place, meaning all the way from the supposed Big Bang to, an evolution of when galaxies take form, the solar system, planet Earth, first, extremophiles, all the way until human beings get created, then I guess you could use some, I believe, inductive reasoning to say that what shows up in our mind could be a decohered version of cosmic consciousness. So we're going from a higher dimensional space to fit into the lower dimensional organ level, the brain, in a warm, largish, non-quantum system. And the reason I added that in is there is some rebuttals on how there's not any quantum processes involved in the mind. We'll be digging deeper into that because we tend to look at the brain and follow a classical model with it, which is fair, but it might be holding us back. So when you go from high dimension to lower dimension, maybe we could say that this type of decoherence, right? It could be dimensionality reduction. What's that all about? Well, let's talk about it. Dimensionality reduction. What is it? It is the process of taking higher dimensional data and reducing it to fewer dimensions while preserving its structure and information. Higher dimensional data beyond 3D in physics and math, at least, equals more degrees of freedom or types of information to measure. our human minds think spatially. So even for me, I struggle with thinking what 4D would be spatially. And we are limited by our cognition and sensation to 3D. But we are going to, I just want to say everything in this topic needs a part two. It's just extremely complex. But I'm laying down the groundwork for the consciousness side of it, and then we'll hit the cosmological side in the part two. Um, but yeah, we struggle to kind of think beyond spatially with 3D. But coming back to dimensionality reduction and why does it take place? Because if you're preserving structure and you can do all this stuff, it seems so efficient, right? Well, going back to quantum decoherence, when you are pulling from the universal field of consciousness, everything is in this vibratory state. Nothing has taken form yet. Right, so there's lots of data, infinite dimensions. I'm not talking about spatial, I'm just saying types of data. And the way it could be encoded could be totally beyond I know it's beyond my understanding, right? I'm just doing my best here to make sense of it all with you guys. But in absolute cosmic coherence, there's these infinite dimensions before anything has taken like any physical form, right? So there's almost this inversely proportional relationship, and I want to key in the word relationship here. If you remember uh, two talks ago, I talked about Pratityasamuptapada, dependent origination. Everything exists in relation to one another. So dimensionality reduction is not taking place standalone, right? So as consciousness itself, that field reduces in its dimensionality, it increases in its expressive form, what we see taking place in the universe, like physically at the thermodynamics layer, you could say. And as we aim to kind of go back into coherence, and as consciousness gains its dimensions, that's going up, form is going down. It dissolves. There's no need. That density is keeping at a vibratory level things sort of locked in. And as that frees up and dimensions open up, um, dimensionality of that consciousness layer increases while the form goes down. So inversely proportional relationship. So it's just a natural like it's a natural consequence of having expression of the cosmos, which calls for this type of optimization. It feels like optimization. It is really intelligent. It's just happening because it just happens in relation to everything else. But that being said, human beings are brilliant, and we've come up with so many exciting ways to understand very complex forms of data. So let's take a look at examples of dimensionality reduction. Well, the first one is something we've all dealt with, zip folders and how they work. Little backstory. So bits in a computer, like the values of zeros or ones, 8 bits equal 1 byte. And every file has a lot of bytes, like these Google slides. Like each new character for each new word is another byte. Like right here, right? You have 32 because there's 4 characters, 32 bits, excuse me. So yeah, the cipher that's created will translate in order based on a system where you tackle the most commonly used byte to least commonly used. So the most commonly used byte will, instead of like having a bunch of them, it gets reduced into a bit, in this case 1. And then the least, or excuse me, second most commonly used will be replaced by 2 bits, 0, 1, and then third most would be 0, 0, 1, and so on. And what's great about zip files is it's brilliant. It can act as multiple ciphers. You can segment parts of a file to say which character is equal to which bit. Like maybe this part of the file, it has like the letter A as the most commonly used character. So that's going to equal like the bit value of 1. And then in this section, it'll be like the letter B. So that will be like the 1, which is really smart. Oh my God. UMAP of protein structures in biology. UMAP stands for Uniform Manifold Approximation and Projection. Big words. A dimensionality reduction algorithm. So proteins themselves, they don't do this, but we use UMAP to understand proteins. Scientists collect tons of data about proteins like shape, sequence, folding structure, binding partners, etc. And that data lives in high dimensional space. It's just a lot of data. It's not beyond 3D. UMAP takes that data and projects it onto lower dimensional space, like a 2D plot, so we can better understand it. My favorite, Origami structures in aerospace engineering. Origami structures, they start as 2D sheets. We've all kind of played around with them as kids, I think. And through folding patterns, you get 3D form. For limited rocket storage space, you can fold large structures like solar panels and antennas into compact volumes. For desire for self-assembly or ease of deployment in outer space, some origami designs unfold autonomously under heat or pressure. This is so brilliant how we've thought of things like this. Wow. But my main topic, the spicy twist, our brains. So, what could be the brain's secret dimensionality reduction process? EEGs. I get a lot of these because I'm epileptic, and I was like, the answer was in my mind the entire time. A test that measures the electrical activity in your brain, how it works. So first, signal collection, EEG systems record brain activity. This generates microvolt level electrical signals in real time that gets recorded. Signal pre-processing, clearing out background static, filtering out noise like eye blinks, muscle movement twitches, removing artifacts, segmenting data into epochs or chunks of time, baseline correction, etc. So true brain music can be heard clearly. Feature extraction, where you can grab meaningful features like different brainwave states, and fractal nonlinear features. Classification or visualization, you visualize the signal over time with graphs, topographic maps, do source localization, which just means where in the brain are those signals coming from, and then do a brain-computer interface application, reach your conclusions, all of that. The doctors do all that. Okay, well, my focus is on the fun part, fractals and nonlinear features, so let's get into it. Look at this beautiful visual. So there is a process that takes place called EEG, fractal dimensional analysis. It is a method used to quantify the complexity of shapes and patterns by measuring how much detail is revealed as you zoom in to your signals when they get a little extra squiggly. Okay, so fractal dimensions is often one of the features used in dimensionality reduction, which I thought was really fun to connect the dots with because, like I said, there's likely my stance is that the mind is presenting a decohered version of cosmic consciousness, and with that decoherence, it gives rise to thinking about dimensionality reduction. And if we can use fractal dimensions and these algorithms to understand how that's happening, I wonder what kind of unraveling we could do. So higher fractal dimension values indicate greater complexity, but there's a spectrum. So like LSD, high dosage of shrooms, etc., would give you higher fractal dimension values, which indicate higher levels of consciousness. And nonlinear dynamics theory, I think, would be better over linear methods to understand EEGs and our cognitive operations. I understand that the brain and cognitive operations, they're classical operations, they're not quantum in nature. But everything that comes into classical form pulls from the quantum realm, right? It would behoove us, especially when it comes to the mind and how we operate, especially with all kinds of problems that go on around the world, right? With mental health and brain health, that there's, if you're looking for things with linear methods and you're only approaching things classically, what you see is what you're going to get. I believe there's more to the story. That's why I think nonlinear dynamics theory should have supremacy in all of this. So what does higher fractal dimension mean? First, let's just talk about fractals and what dimension that shows in before we talk about how it gets higher. Start simple. A line is 1D. A square is 2D. You got the length, and now you got the width. Fractals are somewhere in between. They're not quite that straight line where it's like one axis or one dimension of space. They start getting a little like this. So it's like taking up some width or height, however which way you're looking at it, but not entirely. And also remember, fractals are self-similar complex structures that maintain their look across various scales. So fractals move in a linear path into squiggly territory where they can start taking up either length or width, but not entirely a full 2D plane like a square, for example. The more complex the movement is, the more the brain is exploring, and the more the brain is exploring, the less filtered it is. Kind of like how LSD and shrooms remove egoic filters to our consciousness. I use the word filter because there was like a whole talk I had dedicated to how the brain is a filter of the universal field of consciousness, not a creator of it. Let's dive a little bit deeper. We've gone from working with clusters of neurons with EEGs, and now let's kind of focus on neural manifolds specifically. So a manifold is some shape in Euclidean space which locally resembles a Euclidean space of lower dimension. You can pause the video here if you want to look at these definitions. Euclidean space is just regular space that meets the five axioms of Euclid. So while EEGs work with electrodes on the scalp, non-invasive, to grab data on clusters of neurons, multi-electrode arrays are more invasive, and they will grab your firing rates and spikes, electrical data from that, from individual neurons. So before we get a little deeper into how it looks and works, we'll talk about R space. Imagine it as like a real number line, and every number represents a dimension. So our universe is in R3 or 3D Euclidean space, and even though we're 3D and we can't perceive higher dimensional values, the spaces are analogous to one another, which is why we are able to take data from a higher dimension, preserve it into something that's digestible to us. I pulled this from Artem Kirsanov's video of the elegant geometry of neurons or something like that. Computational neuroscience YouTube channel, really great. So when that high dimensional structure gets filtered into lower dimensions through brain waves and fractals, we can track it. Isn't that great? I just want to take a pause and say that's so fantastic. Like it's not something so far away from us. You just have to know where to look and you can track. Wow, that's brilliant. Anyway, the ambient space is high dimensional, but actual neuron firing trajectory fires on low dimensional structure. What does this mean? So R to the 100 would be 100 here would be the number of neurons recorded. And so that data is going to exist in 100 dimensional space. That correlation and coordination between neurons creates a curved, low-dimensional surface in ambient space. So even though your brain could explore 100 dimensions, it only needs a few to actually go through with the task. That few that's shaped by biology, learning, and context is the neural manifold. So like if you want to look over here, like ambient space, if this is like a 3D plot and there's all of this like 100 dimensions that could be taken up, that's all the neurons. But like when you're doing something like picking up a pencil, like that act, what that takes, the way that data is going to show up is making these like curves and lines. And we'll get into this more in part two, but the smoothness or the lack of smoothness could point a lot to any issues that show up from the mind. So yeah, you have 100 neurons, but you don't need all 100 of them to be able to carry out your simple tasks of like picking up a water bottle or picking up a highlighter. So let's define a neural network when neurons fire electrical signals together in coordinated patterns. And neural manifolds emerge from neural network activity. There's a paper I was looking at. Here's a little visual from it. And how the brain kind of has, there's like a fuzziness initially. And the more you kind of recognize a pattern again and again, the fuzziness reduces and there's like a clearness, I believe, to the manifolds. If I get any of this wrong and one of you guys are neuroscientists, please correct me. With practice, the brain fine-tunes that pathway and keeps it efficient, reducing the dimensional clutter because then you're not as much in the ambient space, like you are working with the manifold pathway. Oh, fun thing. Okay, so in studies of galactic clusters, neural networks can be used to analyze fractal dimensional values, with research suggesting values from 2.5 to 2.7. The graphic I had for neural manifolds, is really pretty and dark and purple. There's like a link between that. I think there's a YouTube video about like the universe's mind or the mind of the universe, something like that. Well, having those values from 2.5 to 2.7, it's more than 2D, less than 3D. So like galaxy clusters, neural activity traces behave almost like it's filling a 3D space, but not fully being in that solid form. There's like gaps and holes and these irregular structures, but they're also self-similar because they're fractals. And, if only there was a way to increase the dimensionality of our consciousness and connect that with the cosmos, that would be nice. Oh, I guess there is. It's the Sri Yantra. This is what it looks like. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it before, but it pulls from tantric philosophy. Very, very beautiful. So Sri Yantra, sacred geometry, and consciousness. In Hindu tantric philosophy, this intricate diagram is understood as a microcosm of the entire cosmos and of human consciousness. So the directly accessible dimensions of meditation. So one dimension first. One dimension indicates a point, which in this case would be chakra points within. And these are all related. So all parts of the Sri Yantra are also linked to points within your body as well. So meditating on each of these points would be a way of elevating yourself. This is now the two-dimensional version. The two dimensions indicate width and length. So the image of the Sri Yantra has the ability to help smooth out those neural manifold lines, inducing an alpha wave state. There's actually research that's done on this one. I'm pulling up this paper now. This is not entirely for just Sri Yantras, but it's also for architectural spaces and how there is a sense of relaxation. Like it's no coincidence that when you're in beautiful buildings and spaces, you feel like a sense of coherence, a sense of relaxation. That's literally the point. Those are the geometries we follow. It's also why I guess when you're taking psychedelics, you're elated. You're also seeing these patterns everywhere. I mean, this is your natural state of being. There is an order we all follow in nature because there is this level of efficiency which promotes health and longevity for anything that's been created in the cosmos. So three dimensions would create this structure called the Mahameru, a 3D representation, either outward or inward. This one is going outwards. Some of them like point inwards of the yantra design. So like, I'm just gonna go back. Oh no, that didn't go back. Hold on. This went back. So the 2D version is this. The 3D version is this. That is so cool to me. All right. We're going to come back to this because I know this is an image of something, but the 4-dimension value of being able to meditate and psychosomatically neurobiologically work with the Sri Yantra would lead you to the 4-dimensional value of the embodiment of the consciousness with the structure of Devi herself. And this monk, going by the name of Swami Jagatadmananda Saraswati, sorry, don't mean to disrespect, but he said that the goal is to actually cross all of these dimensions and be dimensionless. And so, in one of the other papers I was taking a look at, I saw this interesting segment where when the brain is exposed to rhythmic stimulus, the rhythm is reproduced in brain in the form of electrical impulses. And it likes to synchronize its own electrical cycles to the same rhythm, frequency following response. This is talking more about sound waves, just being transparent and clear. And if people have more to add, would love to hear about it. But I think it's fantastic that our brain is responsive to the reality and it makes sense, right? It's an intuitive thing. You are going to be affected by the things that you're looking at. So maybe this could be a call to take a look at, why particular chants work, why listening to certain rhythms work. I think it's binaural beats that help people who have ADHD. So yeah, I think that kind of order that's like followed the structure that you see in a visual sense, it's also applied to all the other senses, like whatever music you listen to. So you notice that in the Sri Yantra, there are triangles everywhere. It starts with 4 upward triangles, I believe, and there's 5 downward triangles, and it creates 43 triangles altogether. Well, triangles are when the universe takes form and comes alive. That's a wonderful concept. I mean, really, there's a point and then there's like a line, but the first shape is a triangle because it's the most efficient form of a 2D shape because it's the least number of lines necessary to make a 2D shape. I was actually taking a look at my skin. I don't know if you guys have a similar thing going on, but I realized that my skin it looks like it's made out of cut up triangles entirely. So like when I shape and move it around, the triangles are able to sort of maintain their space and the structure of my skin, and it'll compress and expand. I was kind of curious why. So I was learning about geodesic domes, spherical or partially spherical structures made of interlocking triangles. So they're designed to evenly distribute tension of compression. So like, yeah, when you push down, but in a particular, our skin, it's constantly reshaping under internal tension, any movement going on at the organ level, blood movement level, and then external feedback like wind, someone giving us a hug, it all affects our skin. And this is the way it maintains its form. So beautiful. Another thing too, the Sri Yantra is reversible. So we're gonna go and walk through everything, but it depicts the evolution of the cosmos, Bindu, the center point, and its outward expansion, and then its involution or dissolution from the outer back to Bindu. The Sri Yantra is also called the Navachakra because it has 9 enclosures, avaranas. These ones we will go through specifically. Each avarana is associated with specific deities and powers, and also can be related to stages of cosmology and consciousness. More on this in the next talk. Yes, because I want you to know that deities and powers, they're just, even those are a form of dimensionality reduction, like stories, right? Because if you explain things in a technical way, and just that, you're removing experience. And stories allow us to be technical, use it, and apply it to something we can experience and maybe relate to and resonate with in our mind. I say this to say, when you see specific deities and powers, I think people's ego ears shut off and they think it's something like outside and beyond. It's really not. It's just a way we kind of define, okay, this is super duper complex. It doesn't mean it's not something actually taking place. And that's what's so fun about research. You just keep deep diving to be truth seeking, right? Just look at things in a different way, and maybe something doesn't feel so outside of your consciousness anymore, which is what we're going to talk about with the Sri Yantra. So, we talked about multidimensionality in the sense of like having more features, more degrees of freedom, starting with consciousness, the universal field of consciousness. And so there's this idea that like we spend a lot of time trying to get to know and understand what the meaning of life is. How can we understand? I like to call it aberrations of lines. And I was saying that before I knew what neural manifolds were for like reality-based disorders, anything with schizophrenia, something I'm passionate about, like resolving entirely DPDR, multiple personality disorder slash dissociative identity disorder. The list goes on, right? Because it causes people so much of this pain. But there is, if you've been in a situation where you're like, you had to be there, I can't describe this dream to you because words are more like symbolic, they're objectifying, they're not totally enough. So to say you know something, it's relational. Again, like words are existing in relation to one another. If you say you know something, you're kind of indicating that there are things that you don't know. So, little paradox here. If you say you know the cosmos, you likely don't know the cosmos. And as I was writing this slide, I had found, I don't know if it was in the Upanishads, but something about like if you say you know Brahman, you probably don't actually know it. And we'll define what true knowing is in a little bit. So at some point, it's really great that we spend a lot of time in society trying to use, STEM fields. I went to Georgia Tech for computer science myself. Like it's really amazing that we have created beautiful structures and ways of understanding things. But there's a point where we might be just kidding ourselves here, running in circles. Embodiment is that next step instead of knowing the cosmos, and that would be going beyond our human consciousness. There's no more knowing that's going to help you understand. You have to become it. Okay, so going through all of the avaranas, we're going to start with the Trilokya Mohana Chakra. This is the realm of illusion and distraction Maya. If you remember my holographic reality video, I talked about the vibratory boundary that exists on the universe. So this area would be that where differentiation of knowledge begins, where the formation of the cosmos begins to take form. So again, I'm laying down the consciousness foundation here, and then we'll talk more in the second part of this with how it relates cosmologically to everything. Now, these 16 petals in the Sarvasha Paripuraka Chakra, these 16 petals, each petal represents a power or force that governs desire. This layer addresses the purification of desire itself, not the repression of it. Doesn't really work in society when you tell people to not want things, to abstain from things, because that's how you get taboo culture. That's how you get things happening anyways, just behind the scenes, and it causes a lot of destruction in society and a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. This, when it says purification of desire itself, it's just like moving from attachment to preference. Like it would be nice if I could have this, but it's not that like my life entirely depends on it or my joy necessitates having XYZ things. The Sarva Sankshobhini Chakra, emotional turbulence arises. The samskaras or imprints of lifetimes shake loose. Before I go any further, again, like I said, our brain likes to look at these images. It feels like this sense of peace. And I believe, and if I'm wrong, I'll correct it in the next talk. The idea is to kind of like go from the outside looking in from like the structure of the squares and to kind of spiral slowly, slowly inwards. It's a remembrance of self. And as you get deeper, and I believe we'll call it like shadow work in like therapy speak in the West, right? Where as you confront parts of yourself, like your samskaras or imprints of lifetimes in the past begin to shake loose here. So the Sarva Sobhagya Dayaka Chakra, Devi is the goddess. Don't turn your ego ears off. You just bear with me here, okay? Devi's grace and auspiciousness begins to arise. You begin to feel supported by unseen forces. Your frequency shifts. And also when I'm talking about these effects too, there is a sense of being that happens like over time. So I'm talking about the effects you should expect to see the more you kind of like look from the outside in and meditate on this, and how you know where you're at in each point of the Sri Yantra. Sarvata Sadaka Chakra, will, intention, and dharma activate. The seeker now becomes a manifester. Goals become spiritually aligned. Spiritually aligned, it just means that, your desires don't come from a place of ego. Like simple example, like you want to have a car or you want to have a particular house, right? Like who told you you needed that? That's maybe you're trying to one up your friends. I don't know what you guys are trying to do. But the point is like you also don't have to give up anything, right? Like if you have a unique energetic signature to your desires and how you want to show up in this reality, likely it is the case that that aligns with cosmic harmony and coherence. So those two kind of start, riding the wave together. So this is what I was touching on before. The Sarvarakshakra chakra, the inner compass is strong now. You become immune to lower vibrational harm. Divine protection surrounds you. So they say, this is where the threshold begins. From seeking and knowing to embodying. Most people will approach the Sri Yantra because, I don't know, there are other options. They want to find a way to center in peace. So they're seeking, right, in the very beginning. All of these things like right in the beginning, like you're realizing maybe reality isn't what it seems, right? That's why you're here. And, you're talking about desires all the way to like imprints. So like when you start going into imprints, you start slowly remembering your true essence, right? And if you remember the Panchakoshas model that I've discussed, your true nature is none of those koshas or layers. It's actually that you're self-illuminating consciousness awareness. So as the remembering happens, there is that fight from the ego and the mind because it wants to prevail. And so as you sort of get a little bit deeper at this, say, semi-midpoint area is when that's going to sort of dissolve because you've kind of, in spite of external turbulence, you have found a way to maintain a sense of what you feel is your unique purpose here. And so instead of seeking and trying to remember, this is now slowly getting into how you can embody it. And now at the Sava Rogara Chakra, there is deep karmic and cellular healing, which is really interesting. I would be curious. Maybe I'll self-experiment and see what I find. But these things are so nonlinear. It would look different for every person. but the disease of separation, of ego, of doubt starts dissolving. I actually like how this is phrased because this is something I strongly believe that we all have a disease, everyone on planet Earth, and it's the disease of the ego or the mind. We're slaves to the mind. We're slaves to dualistic, differentiated knowledge, and yes, the multiplicity of consciousness is amazing. In order for us to exist, our diametrically opposing forces need to exist like our enemies. Ah, I hate it. But it also, like, once you start making rules on who is allowed to be alive and not allowed to be alive, then there is not that, like, degree of freedom of the infinite anymore, which is what the cosmos are. But, um, the multiplicity of consciousness doesn't necessarily mean that we should all be stuck in the disease of ego and operating only from that standpoint. And if you saw my most recent video where I talk about, ways that there's almost like blockages in each way to prevent you from really seeing beyond a certain scope, because the best effects don't come from top down, they come from side to side. So you'll just see, like, everywhere in society we try to enforce ego, whether it be with beauty standards, what you absolutely need to buy or else, what kind of friends to have, what kind of house to have, what kind of anything. So this is where it starts dissolving you. The karmic and cellular healing part, that is very interesting. I'm very curious about how that might work. Anywho, let's keep going. The Sarva Siddhi Prada Chakra, the convergence of the three gunas and the three forces, Iksha, Kriya, and Jnana, Shakti. Iksha is desire, Kriya, I believe, is action, Jnana is knowledge. And this is the realm of miraculous power. So we've gone through all these triangles. I don't know if it's really obvious to see, but now we're finally here at this dot right in the middle. We call it the Bindu. Sarva Anandamaya Chakra, pure union, formlessness. The soul recognizes itself as the cosmos. The divine sees itself through you. That is so beautiful because all of these different chakra points and systems also exist in our body. And it's so subtle, like it's not going to have direct effects. And I think that's why we sort of resist it, because again, with the ego, we operate in linear time for good reason, as we should. Evolution happened in linear time, and that's like at a species level. But when we want to see evolution, like I go to the gym, I want to see my abs, man. Like I don't want to wait 10,000 years because it's a non-linear problem. Like I get it. I totally get it. Um, there's places where linear tracking makes sense, and there's places where this is so it's systemic, but also not, you see, because this system exists, but it serves like the individual based on their karmic imprints, their unique consciousness, and how their life path has been going. You can have something very similar to someone else, but it won't be exactly the same, which is why the way this union would take place would be different for you versus somebody else. But I think it's fantastic that this Sri Yantra itself is a form of dimensionality reduction, because the Bindu here represents, and we'll get more into again, the cosmology part later, but the Bindu represents that, cosmic egg where everything in the cosmos has taken form from. You start here and all the galaxies form, all the clusters, all the elements, solar systems, all of that, until here's the square and we're locked in. One thing I want to add, the square represents space. And then, as you can see, there's three concentric circles here. These circles represent past, present, and future, which is so fun. And the reason is that it's inside of the square is because time depends on space. So there's so much knowledge here of like this encoding of how, where, when, and why. It's both linear and non-linear, which makes this Sri Yantra beautifully non-dualistic. So here is my closing note. I want to give a wonderful quote that I heard recently. Consciousness creates mathematics. Therefore, I cannot explain consciousness with mathematics. How can you explain free will with things that don't have free will? Foolish to think you can explain more with less. Federico Fagan. Hmm. Wow, that's an amazing thing to think about. Because while I'm studying all of this quote comes up, and it truly adds to the concept of bindu and getting to that space where in that avarana, like the sixth one, where you go from like a certain way of seeking and remembering to starting to embody and being, you are only able to, and if you're deducing from this line here, you can only explain consciousness with consciousness. So remember when I was talking about the form of the yantra that's in the fourth dimension, right? Devi. Devi is a deity, an entity, the mother goddess. It is a form of actualized cosmic consciousness. So what you will realize once you get into those dimensions of deeper meditation is that those things are not outside of you. I'm gonna be honest, when I heard about the Sri Yantra last year, I didn't take it seriously, honestly, because a lot of the times people are not deeply researching and trying to get to the bottom of things and understand. But now when I take a look at it as a remembrance of self, of recognizing that you are not just this brain and this body, but something beyond that's taken form in a container of consciousness, you start becoming the embodiment of that thing itself simply by looking at it. It's gosh, I almost think it's like looking at a photo and a memory and remembering that like, oh, 3 years ago I did this and I won this thing. And I'm so proud of myself because I know that's proof that I can never give up or whatever. And this is who I am, that sort of thing, right? So in that, I think 3D is the final, but like consciousness is matched by consciousness itself and itself alone. And that really adds into how we were talking about those three concentric circles existing inside of a square. And those ways of understanding time existing within space makes me sort of wonder if there's a chance that whatever our fourth dimension is consciousness itself. And does consciousness give rise to space-time? Which also makes sense when I'm talking about it from the universal field of consciousness layer. And that was more intuitive. But wording it this way is kind of fascinating because opening my eyes and thinking that I have given rise to this can exist with me. I mean, this is brilliant news because it can really help us to understand our true nature, which is being the creator of our own reality. Oh, and scientism, I should probably define that. Scientism basically says it's like a form of elitism. And it's like if something cannot be explained by science or math, like directly hardcore, then it lacks value. I understand the need for empirical evidence. I actually completely understand that. This is not saying no evidence, no proof, right? It's just saying the proof is going to be in something beyond math and science, which is more of an embodiment of that consciousness itself. So I'm going as far as saying scientism is an oppressive system for consciousness. It's kind of crazy. I feel like at every level we know of oppressive systems that exist in society. And it's like even if you were able to like climb some ladder of circumstance and get to a place of trying to understand beyond, even there is this blockage. I have a lot of friends in PhD programs too that feel this type of limitation or not being taken seriously, and things have to absolutely match the Western paradigm. There's nothing totally wrong with any paradigm. You can learn from all of them. It's when you have a supremacy of it and say everything else is illegitimate. Because why do you feel the need to have all of this power? And why is it that you don't see the value in something else just because it can't be defined in this one way? Like if consciousness in like a tree, right, is at the top, how are you going to use the child to describe the mother in this proverbial tree of existence, right? You can't explain more with less. I think dreams are a really great example of that. Moving on. Okay, so in that sense, we may have a bias towards what exactly has consciousness. We believe our brain is the only organ that does, considering it houses the mind. The brain and mind relationship, I liken it to like earth and world. The mind gives rise to the ego, and the ego has personality, and it gives us our own personality. So I'm not sure if everyone else agrees, but at least when I'm talking about myself and in the past, I'm like, what does it mean to have consciousness? I thought it meant having a personality. And, we want to also feel smart. So when we're thinking about intelligence and what has consciousness and relating it that way, we want to only emphasize not even our full brain, just the left brain side. This makes us ignore other instrumental organs that have their own ways of being conscious and communicating, depending on how you define consciousness, how you define communication. Your cells are talking, your immune system's talking, your gut's talking, your heart rhythms are always talking to you. They're just not using words the way we are. They have their own processes. Um, but yeah, moving on. Embodying would be all parts of your mind body consciousness matrix are maximized to their highest intelligence. And just look again back at this line here, right? We only emphasize the left brain side. We try to maximize that part's intelligence. It's like really segmenting it away. I feel like there's a dictatorship going on within our bodies, right? Like we say the brain is the smartest organ. Who said that? The brain. Oh my God. I can't escape. But also depending on how you define consciousness too, like again, working from the model of panpsychism, like our stomach, just because it doesn't have a personality, doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own process and communication and conscious way of being. That's so silly because when we only look at things in that way, we oppress ourselves, perhaps, maybe, and we deny this ability to really get into a state of true knowing everywhere, where we maximize all parts of ourselves. A lot of the times we're ignoring signals from our own selves all the time. So I just want to say that by working towards the highest version of you, and again, if we kind of think about like going beyond the mind and the brain and like looking at things in nonlinear ways, then you get a little bit subtler. And you also think about the ways that your desires and imprints, you want those parts of you to dissolve. And that's where turbulence takes place. And that's where there's a lot of discomfort. So you do really have to, in order to unravel, it is going to be a change and there's going to be growing pains, right? If you're committed to this path, though, by working on the highest version of you, you're turning into literally the most intelligent version of you because you are the most potent, purest expression of the cosmos realizing itself. Oh my God. You're the most intelligent version. Like, if the cosmos is moving through you like a wave, this is such a reductive way of looking at it. But like instead of being in disharmony like this and cracking and breaking, you've made yourself like this, right? And just because it doesn't look a particular way, like I mean, yes, I brought up the fact that I read papers and things like that, and I watched computational neuroscience videos. That's part of it, just to kind of put it together. But it's really to give vocabulary. Um, you and your sense of intelligence. If anyone actually has intelligence wounds as well, where people don't think that they're smart or like their intelligence is only meant to look a certain way, I really want this to be empowering for you because that's a form of elitism as well. And honestly, if someone is putting you in a situation where they're trying to give you a wound of some sort, I like to look at things energetically in the cosmos, which means harmony, which means balancing forces, which means polarities, which means like pluses and minuses. If someone is minusing you by making you feel terrible about how dumb you are because your passion just doesn't happen to be in physics, that is so, you don't need to have the words for this stuff. A lot of people are in their highest intelligence, living a really wonderful life, fruitful, caring for others, caring for themselves. And just because it doesn't look intelligent doesn't mean that they don't have it. So, working towards the highest version of you is the truest, most intelligent you could ever be. But scientism doesn't want you to know that, right? Because you understand, like, if you realized understanding the cosmos was with your consciousness itself and embodying that, you would have personal power. You would, again, like my eyes opening and thinking that you're the creator of your own reality, you would understand that. And if you understood that, you wouldn't really need to rely on anything like any egoic system whatsoever. It doesn't mean you would stop caring about other people. But once you're self-realized, what what more would you need? You wouldn't fall for things anymore, right? So again, that's why I call it an oppressive system for consciousness. That's just my hot take. I love you as you are, what you're doing. whatever you think it means to be your highest self, please work towards that, okay? All this beautiful science and math that goes behind it is just so that we can come into ourselves and be connected to ourselves, right? And the story doesn't end here. There's so much more fun to be had with all of these topics because, again, we're talking about embodying consciousness, but there's levels beyond that that can be reached. And yes, we're going to use words and math and science to describe it, but I hope that you are feeling the message as much as you are logically understanding that message. So, with that being said, again, nothing but love here. And I just want to say thank you so much for listening to this talk and being here. And I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.